Hello. My sister banned me from her wedding, her husband found out, and now they're separated, she blames me. Then something completely out of the blue happened. Amanda pulled me aside, away from everyone, and hit me with, "Hey, would you be one of my bridesmaids?" For a second, I just stared at her, wondering if this was some kind of weird joke. I mean, seriously? We've barely exchanged more than a handful of words in years, and now she's asking me to stand up at her wedding like we're some kind of inseparable sisters? My mind was racing. Was she doing this because she felt guilty? Was it just for show, to make her wedding look all picture perfect with her little sister by her side? Or maybe, and this was a long shot, she actually wanted to mend things. But let's be real, this is Amanda we're talking about. The same person who used to spread rumors about me for fun and made me feel like a complete outsider. Everything in me wanted to just laugh in her face and say, yeah, no thanks. The idea of standing up there, dressed in some matching bridesmaid dress, acting like we were this happy, loving family, made me feel like I was stepping into some bad Hallmark movie. And honestly, I wasn't sure I could stomach the thought. But instead of standing my ground and risking more drama, I swallowed my pride and said yes. Maybe, just maybe, she was trying to extend an olive branch. Or maybe it was all just for appearances. Either way, I figured, what's the harm? Maybe this could be a step toward finally fixing whatever was broken between us. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. From the start, it was obvious I was a bridesmaid in title only. Amanda barely included me in anything. There was a group chat with the bridesmaids, and while I was technically in it, I might as well have been invisible. Every conversation about dress fittings or bachelorette party plans went on without me. At one point, I asked Amanda if she wanted me to come along for dress shopping, and her response? "Oh, don't worry about it. I've got it all handled." Cool. Great. Thanks for making me feel so wanted, sis. It didn't take long to figure out that asking me to be a bridesmaid wasn't about making amends at all. It was just another way for Amanda to keep me in my place, to remind me I'd never really belong. I ended up stuck with all the grunt work. I helped pick out the wedding favors, sent out the invitations, and basically did whatever boring, thankless task she didn't want to deal with. Meanwhile, the other bridesmaids were off having fun, planning the bachelorette party, an event I wasn't even invited to. But then came the real gut punch. After all the effort I put in, Amanda had the nerve to tell me I wasn't welcome at the wedding. Her reasoning? She actually said, and I quote, "Having someone like you, a product of an affair, would bring bad luck to my marriage." I couldn't believe the words coming out of her mouth. It was like she had taken every cruel thing she'd ever done to me and wrapped it up in one tidy, soul-crushing package. I lost it. I yelled at her, cursed at her, I couldn't hold back anymore. After years of biting my tongue and trying to make things work, this was the last straw. How could my own sister treat me like some kind of bad omen, like my mere existence was a stain on her perfect day? And the worst part? She didn't even flinch. She just stood there, completely unfazed, like I was the one being unreasonable. No apology, no second thoughts, nothing. That was it for me. I was done. I cut her off completely after that. It wasn't even about the wedding anymore. It was about the fact that Amanda saw me as less than human, as some kind of blemish on her life, and she didn't care how much it hurt me. I finally realized I was wasting my energy trying to fit into a family that had never really wanted me in the first place. Of course, Dad stayed out of it like he always does. He probably felt guilty deep down, but he's never been one to take a stand, especially with Ashley in the picture. Honestly, I think Ashley was thrilled I wouldn't be at the wedding. She's always made it clear my absence is her idea of peace and quiet. So, on Amanda's wedding day, I was at home, just minding my business and trying to forget the whole thing was even happening. I was on the couch, flipping through TV channels, when my phone started ringing. It was Amanda, and the second I answered, she was screaming at me. Like, full-on hysterical. She was shouting that I had ruined her life and calling me every name in the book. I barely managed to get out, "What the hell are you talking about?" before she slammed the phone down. I was left sitting there, completely dumbfounded. I hadn't spoken to her, hadn't even thought about her that day, and somehow, I'd ruined her life? A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again, this time, a text from my cousin. All it said was, "You need to see this," with a video attached. Curious, and a little nervous, I opened it. What I saw left me absolutely stunned. It was a clip from the wedding reception. Specifically, it was Roger's speech. And instead of the usual cheesy, heartfelt toast you'd expect at a wedding, Roger decided to use his big moment to call out my entire family. He didn't hold back. He talked about how I'd been treated like an outcast for years, how my family had made me the scapegoat for things completely beyond my control, and how wrong it all was. He said I deserved better, that I deserved to be seen, heard, and treated with respect. At one point, he even said, "Olivia, if you're watching this, I want you to know that not everyone in this family sees you as a mistake. You're more than what they've made you out to be, and I'm sorry you've had to deal with all this." I was speechless. Watching Roger drop truth bombs in front of a room full of people who had spent years making me feel small was surreal. It was like he had ripped the band-aid off a wound I'd been hiding for so long. And while part of me was grateful, hell, even validated, I also knew exactly why Amanda had called me in such a rage. She was humiliated. Her brand new husband had just aired all her dirty laundry in front of her wedding guests, and because it was about me, she blamed me for it. Like I had somehow orchestrated the whole thing. The texts and calls started rolling in after that. Half the family was furious, accusing me of letting Roger ruin Amanda's wedding, as if I'd been the one holding the microphone. The other half, though? They were surprisingly supportive. Some apologized for never standing up for me, while others admitted they hadn't realized how bad things were. I didn't even know how to respond. I just turned my phone off and tried to process what had just happened. Here's the thing, Roger and I had talked a little about my family, but nothing too deep. He knew things were strained, sure, but I never expected him to go out there and deliver a speech like that. And while a tiny part of me felt guilty for the chaos it caused, a much bigger part of me felt relieved. For the first time, someone had said out loud what I'd been feeling my entire life. It wasn't how I expected the day to go, but in a weird way, it gave me a sense of closure I didn't know I needed. After some small talk, the usual "how are you," and "hope you're doing well," Dad finally got to the real reason he called. He wanted me to talk to Roger. Specifically, he wanted me to convince Roger that he was wrong, that things weren't as bad as he made them seem in his speech. I sat there, gripping my phone, feeling the weight of his words hit me like a punch in the gut. My own father was asking me to rewrite my history. To pretend that the years of hurt, rejection, and being treated like I didn't belong were just some figment of my imagination. I let out this sharp, bitter laugh. "Are you serious right now?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Rebecca's marriage is at stake," he replied, his tone just shy of pleading. "The family's reputation is on the line. If you just talk to Roger, this whole thing could blow over." And there it was. The same old tune he'd been humming my whole life, protect the family image at all costs, even if it means erasing me in the process. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not doing it." I wasn't about to betray Roger for telling the truth. And I sure as hell wasn't going to pretend like my family hadn't spent years making me feel like I was some kind of walking mistake. But Dad wasn't done. He doubled down, throwing out every excuse he could think of. "This whole thing's been blown way out of proportion," he said, like that would magically erase the years of insults, the cold shoulders, the unspoken rule that I was always less than. "If you just talk to Roger, it'll smooth everything over. Think about the family." "The family," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You mean the same family that's treated me like garbage my entire life?" That shut him up for a second, but only for a second. "This isn't the time to dig up the past," he said. "We need to focus on the present." "Funny how the past only matters when it's convenient for you," I shot back. "I'm not going to lie for you, for Rebecca, or for anyone else. What Roger said was the truth, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to make you all feel better about yourselves." The conversation didn't last much longer. He realized I wasn't budging, and I think that frustrated him more than anything else. He hung up with a curt, "Fine. Have it your way," but I knew it wasn't over. It didn't take long for the rest of the family to start piling on. My phone became a battlefield of texts and calls. Rebecca sent me long, dramatic messages accusing me of ruining her life and warning me that her marriage was on the brink of collapse, all because I refused to fix what Roger said. Other family members chimed in too, some angrier than others. "How could you let this happen?" they asked, as if I'd been the one standing at the mic that day. "You need to fix this." But not everyone was against me. A few sent quiet messages of support, admitting they hadn't realized how bad things had been for me growing up. One cousin even apologized, saying they regretted not speaking up for me sooner. The mixed responses left me feeling confused, angry, tired. Mostly tired. I'd spent my entire life trying to navigate this family, trying to prove I belonged, and now it felt like they were all leaning on me to clean up the mess they'd created. And Rebecca? She just kept pushing. Her texts got longer, more frantic. She wanted me to take back control of the narrative, to paint her and Dad and Ashley in a better light. But no part of me was willing to do that. If Rebecca's marriage was falling apart because of the truth Roger told, that was on her. On them. It wasn't my responsibility to lie, to sacrifice my own peace, just to help her save face. I'll admit, part of me felt a twinge of guilt. Not for what Roger said, I stood by that 100%. But I didn't want to see Rebecca's marriage fall apart. I wanted to be better than them, to rise above the pettiness and cruelty they'd shown me. But where do you draw the line? At what point do you stop giving and start protecting yourself? The more they pushed, the more I realized what this was really about. It wasn't about fixing things between us. It was about making me complicit in their cover-up. They didn't want reconciliation, they wanted control. I considered blocking their numbers just to get some peace. But I knew that would only add fuel to the fire. And honestly, I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of painting me as the villain in their story. I just want to move on with my life. To leave the drama behind and find some kind of peace. But they keep dragging me back into their mess, and I'm not sure how to make it stop. Update 1. Hi everyone. I've been reading your comments, and I want to thank you for your support. Some of you had questions about my backstory, and I figured now's a good time to clear a few things up. A lot of you asked why I was even living with my dad and Ashley in the first place. The answer is simple: I didn't have a choice. My mom passed away when I was 4. She died in a car accident on the way to the hospital. After that, there was nowhere else for me to go. My dad was my only option. And yes, I know my dad sucks. I've never sugarcoated that. He's the reason this whole mess started in the first place. He and my mom had an affair while he was still married to Ashley. It went on for about a year before everything blew up. Ashley only found out when a friend of hers saw my dad and mom at a women's clinic together. Despite everything, Ashley stayed. I've tried to imagine what that must have been like for her, to forgive him and move forward. But her decision to stay came at a cost, and unfortunately, I became the price she paid. Growing up, I was never truly part of their family. Ashley tolerated me, but it was clear she resented my existence. She made offhand comments like, "Your mother might have been prettier, but at least I'm the one who stayed," or, "I wonder how different your life would be if she hadn't died." I didn't understand the full weight of her words until I got older. By the time I was a teenager, I knew exactly how she felt about me. To her, I was a walking reminder of my dad's betrayal, nothing more. The reason Roger gave that speech at the wedding? It all came down to what he found out after the ceremony. Turns out, someone let it slip during the reception that Rebecca had uninvited me. And Roger, who had no clue this had happened, was furious. Roger's always been the chill, easygoing type, but I guess that was his breaking point. He was already dealing with the high emotions of a wedding day, and hearing that his new wife had excluded me for no good reason pushed him over the edge. So, in the heat of the moment, he decided to call out my family in his speech. I don't think he did it to make a scene or ruin anyone's day. That's just not who Roger is. But he couldn't stomach how unfairly I'd been treated, especially when I hadn't done anything to deserve it. A lot of you also asked why I even agreed to be a bridesmaid in the first place, given the strained relationship between me and Rebecca. And honestly, I thought maybe this was her way of trying to mend fences. For a second, I let myself believe it was an olive branch, a chance to move past all the bad blood. Looking back, I realized that was probably naive. But at the time, I just wanted to believe things could get better. So, when she asked me to be part of her wedding, I said yes, even though deep down, I had a feeling it might not end well. And surprise, Rebecca didn't disappoint. She treated me like her personal assistant leading up to the wedding, then unceremoniously uninvited me when I was no longer useful to her. But what really gutted me wasn't just the uninvitation, it was why she said I couldn't come. Rebecca had the audacity to tell me that having someone like me, the product of an affair, at her wedding would bring bad luck. I don't think I've ever felt more like an outsider than I did in that moment. Her words weren't just about the wedding, they were a reminder of all the years I'd been treated like I didn't belong. That comment was the final nail in the coffin. When Roger found out what Rebecca had done, I guess he felt like he had to say something. He didn't do it for attention, and I certainly didn't ask him to defend me. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good to finally have someone acknowledge what I'd been going through. Of course, his speech caused a huge uproar, and now I'm the one being blamed for ruining Rebecca's wedding, despite the fact that I wasn't even there. Update 2. Things have gotten even more complicated, because of course, they have, right? Yesterday, about 3 days after the wedding, Roger called me. I wasn't expecting to hear from him so soon, but I was curious, so I picked up. He asked if we could meet up to talk, and I agreed. We decided on this small cafe near my house. It's one of those places with outdoor seating where you can sip coffee and pretend your life isn't a total train wreck. When I got there, Roger looked worn out. He seemed stressed, which, honestly, I get. We'd both been through the emotional ringer. We started with some small talk, but it didn't take long for him to cut to the chase. He apologized for everything, for his speech at the wedding and for the chaos it caused. At first, I didn't know what to say. I didn't feel like he owed me an apology. If anything, he was the only one who had stood up for me during this entire mess. But I guess he felt bad about how things spiraled out of control. I asked him why he didn't just talk to Rebecca directly instead of calling me, and he told me he had talked to her. He said he confronted her right after finding out she'd uninvited me, but she basically brushed him off. She dismissed my concerns like they weren't a big deal, he said, his voice heavy with frustration. That hit me hard. I thought Roger knew exactly how Rebecca treated me. I figured if he was marrying her, he had to have seen the way she acted around me. But apparently, she'd hidden that side of herself from him or at least downplayed it enough for him to overlook. So I asked, "What are you going to do now?" Roger hesitated. He looked conflicted, like he hadn't really figured that part out yet. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me is struggling with the idea of being married to someone who could treat her own sister like this. But it's marriage, you know? It's not something you just walk away from. I could see how torn he was, and for a moment, I actually felt bad for him. He didn't sign up for this kind of drama when he said I do. But at the same time, this was the reality of being with Rebecca. Then, out of nowhere, Roger asked, "Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" That question caught me completely off guard. Forgiveness? I hadn't even thought about that yet. I'd been too busy trying to process everything that's happened. So I told him the truth. Rebecca hasn't even called me except that one time when she cussed me out after the wedding. Roger's face fell. He looked genuinely shocked, like he couldn't believe she hadn't reached out to make things right. I told her, he said slowly, that our marriage depends on her apologizing to you and fixing this mess. I was clear about that. I told her I couldn't move forward if she didn't at least try. Hearing that floored me. Rebecca had been given an ultimatum by her own husband, and she still chose to dig her heels in. It was like her pride was more important than her relationships, not just with me, but with Roger too. We talked for a little while longer, but the whole conversation felt heavy, like there was this giant cloud hanging over us. Roger eventually got up to leave, but before he did, he said he was going to talk to Rebecca again to figure out where they stood. Part of me felt sorry for him. He's clearly stuck in a situation he didn't anticipate. But another part of me thought, this is the reality of being with Rebecca. At this point, I'm just trying to keep my head above water. Update 3. Hey everyone. Well, here we are, the final update. It's been about a month since I last shared anything, and honestly, I didn't expect to be writing this. But life, as always, had other plans. A lot has happened, and I think this is where the story ends, or at least, my part in it. Let's start with the obvious, Rebecca still hasn't apologized. I know, shocking, right? At this point, I've stopped expecting anything from her. I don't think she's capable of accountability, and honestly, that's on her, not me. The good news? The constant badgering from my parents has finally stopped. I don't know if they finally realized I wasn't going to cave or if they just got tired of hitting a brick wall, but either way, I'm grateful. For the first time in what feels like forever, I've had some real peace. No guilt trips. No manipulative phone calls. Just quiet. And now, for the big news, Rebecca and Roger are officially separated. Yeah, I know, it's a lot to take in. I didn't see it happening this soon, but from what I've learned, through Roger and a few of my cousins, their relationship had been on shaky ground for a while. The wedding drama wasn't the sole reason for their split, it was just the spark that lit the powder keg. When I first heard about it, I won't lie, I felt this pang of guilt. I couldn't help but wonder if I was the one who set all of this in motion. But Roger was quick to shut that down. He reached out to me not long after the separation became official, and he assured me that their issues ran far deeper than just the wedding fiasco. This wasn't about me, it was about who Rebecca is at her core. That was a huge relief to hear because, honestly, I've spent my entire life trying to avoid being the problem in the family. The idea that I could have been responsible for someone else's marriage falling apart was hard to stomach. But Roger made it clear, this wasn't my fault. As for Rebecca, well, she's not taking it well. Not that I expected her to. From what I've heard, she's been blaming everyone but herself, classic Rebecca move. Some of my cousins have told me she's spinning this ridiculous story about how I manipulated Roger into leaving her. Honestly? It's laughable. But at the same time, it's exhausting. Even when I'm not actively involved, she somehow manages to make me the villain. Meanwhile, Roger and I have stayed in touch. We're not best friends or anything, but we've checked in on each other a few times since everything went down. He seems to be doing okay, or at least, as okay as you can be after something like this. He told me he's started seeing a therapist, which I think is such a smart move. I genuinely hope he finds peace because if anyone deserves a fresh start after all this mess, it's Roger. As for me? I'm doing better. Slowly but surely, I'm learning to let go of the weight my family has placed on my shoulders for so long. This whole ordeal has been a harsh reminder of what I've known for years: you can't force people to change. And you can't carry the blame for other people's choices. Rebecca's marriage falling apart wasn't my fault. It was a consequence of her actions and her unwillingness to take responsibility. I've spent enough of my life being made to feel like I'm the problem, and I'm done with it. So, yeah. This might be the end of the road for this saga. If something else happens, I'll let you know, but for now, I'm ready to close this chapter and move on. Thank you to everyone who's stuck with me through this. Your advice, kindness, and support have meant more to me than I can say. It's been a wild ride, but I think I'm finally stepping off. Here's to peace and new beginnings. Bye-bye.